And we are live. All right, welcome everyone to our first ever office hours. I'm Daniel, and I've got with me Alex Svanovic, our founder and glorious leader here at Nansen. So Alex, let's kick it off. Maybe you can tell us a bit about how Nansen came to be and what itch you were trying to scratch when you started Nansen.
Yeah, so I've worked in the sort of AI space for about 10 years in different roles. And in 2017 is when I started working in the intersection of crypto and data. And one of the other co-founders, Evgeny, also has worked in the intersection of crypto and data for the last couple of years. And we noticed that there were some recurring themes or recurring problems that our clients were dealing with. So both when we were talking to companies we were working with, also a startup that we worked at in Hong Kong, and just generally people who were sort of doing investigations and so on with on-chain data, they felt like they didn't have proper data on wallets. They didn't really know like which entities were behind wallets, easy ways to understand like what a specific wallet is if you're looking at one on Etherscan and so on. So that was really the first problem we tried to tackle with Nansen. And we actually thought that it was going to be sort of like a wallet label API, just like a service on its own that we could plug into other services. But we quickly understood that we wanted something that was more sort of holistic. So we combined this with the on-chain data that we got through an open source project that Evgeny is the creator of called Ethereum ETL. So these two components, the kind of on-chain data and the off-chain wallet labels that we get from algorithms, scraping, manual investigations, and so on, are really, from a technology perspective, the things that create Nansen. And then, of course, you have dashboards, charts, tables, and so on top of that data. So that was back in October, and we also have a third co-founder called Lars, who's really great at data engineering, data architecture, and the three of us started working on this basically in October last year. Obviously building on a lot of components we had been working on for longer than that. And so in April is when we launched to the general public, getting our first customers on day one. And yeah, since then it's just been a lot of enthusiasm and engagement, which has been great.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely a lot of engagement. In fact, I joined about a couple months ago because I love the product. So I was using it during the DeFi summer, found just so much value in it, and then reached out to Alex. Yeah.
Did you make any good trades? Or?
A couple. Yeah, can't complain. So we got a few people in the chat here. Hey, Elon and Martin, thanks for joining. So let's maybe start covering some of the stuff we're looking at in behind the scenes. At Nansen, we've obviously got the dashboards that people know and love. We've got token god mode, we've got wallet profiler, et cetera. But that's kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data we have available to us. But that being said, those dashboards alone are extremely valuable. So maybe you can kind of cover what you've been looking at this week and what you found.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll share my screen right away because it'll be a bit easier to talk over. Let's see if I can manage to do that. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yep.
So this was pretty much the big thing that I woke up to today. There was a massive mass liquidation, I should say, on Compound, which I wanted to look into a bit more closely. So I was thinking in this session we could look a bit at kind of the investigations I did using Nansen and how you can use these dashboards that we have in similar ways for future situations like this. So just to give the context on what happened, basically, you probably know Compound. It's a money market protocol on Ethereum, and what happened was that some people were able to basically drive the price of DAI up to about a 30% premium, which effectively meant that if you had debt in DAI on the Compound protocol, suddenly your debt was 30% higher, and you probably didn't expect that because DAI is a stable coin. And so effectively, many people got liquidated because of this. And in fact, almost $100 million of liquidations took place. And there were some wallets that were particularly exposed to this. So the first thing that I was curious to look into was basically who are the people who were most impacted by these liquidations, because you could find sort of macro numbers on how much value was liquidated. But I was curious to see, you know, are there specific wallets that might have been hit harder from this? And so what I did was I went to this dashboard in Nansen, which is called Top Recipients. And so this is just to show that, like, it's not always the case that you have exactly kind of the dashboard you're looking for, right? Like, we didn't have kind of a liquidation dashboard, which maybe we should have, but we didn't have it at that point in time. And so the first thought I had was, well, I'm going to look at the Top Recipients dashboard and look at who are the people who have been farming the most comp, because that sort of reflects people who have been putting a lot of money into the Compound platform, or who have also, you know, taken on a lot of debt, because that's how you accrue comp, by yield farming comp effectively. And so this Top Recipients dashboard, like, why is that relevant? Well, this lets you see how much tokens different addresses have extracted from a given address. And so I could basically plug in the comptroller address, which is its Compound's own contract. And so, you know, I've plugged that into the URL up here. That's how I personally like to, you know, use Nansen, but I can show you what it looks like if you don't plug that in. So if you just go to pro.nansen.ai/top recipients, you will have these parameters where you can plug in the same values. But I've just plugged them in as sender address and token address. And so the sender address, you know, just to show you as well on Etherscan what this is, you could also run it through Wallet Profiler and so on. But this is like the Compound, you know, comptroller as it shows in the dashboard as well. That's where all the comp tokens are farmed from, basically. And so this gives me a starting point. Like, hey, maybe some of these addresses were hit by this. And so, okay, there's a couple here. So there's a medium DEX trader on top who has farmed a lot of comp tokens. This is how much they received in net from the comptroller contract, as I said. So there's the top one. There's also this 3 Hours Capital address as number 2. And then, you know, as number 3 is this one. And so I sort of looked at these a bit manually on Etherscan and so on. And then digging around a bit, I found that this address here, which I can actually bring up in, let's see if I can find the right one here. Yeah, I brought that up into the Wallet Profiler for Token dashboard, which you can also find here, you know, in our list here. And we should probably do a better job at linking these together. But effectively, you know, you can see how this guy has like done lots of transactions with Compound. A lot of the DAI that they have sent out have gone into Compound, and then they've also basically received a lot from the 0 address, which indicates they might have been minting DAI or pulling it out of the DAI savings contract. But effectively, I spun up this thing here on the side as well to look at liquidation specifically, and I think we're probably going to make a separate dashboard for this later. But I could see right away, like, what were the largest DAI liquidations ever made. And indeed, the top one was this address that I was looking at. So, you know, if you go back, you see it's the same address up here, 0x909. And they actually had a liquidation of $46 million. And you can see this. Oop, that's a bad link. Let me see if I can do that in another way. Well, actually, I can probably just go. No, actually, I don't have a good link to this from here. You'll just have to trust me that this was a $46 million liquidation that took place, and this borrower was the one who was impacted by it. So there's also a couple of other liquidity borrowers on Compound who suffered liquidations, and you see some of these addresses actually recurring, meaning that they suffered multiple liquidations. And so I put together this quick dashboard as well, which sums that up, and you see, for example, this address here had a $17.5 million dollar liquidation in total that they suffered. So this is one thing that I was looking at. I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but the starting point for me was really just looking at, hey, what are the largest comp yield farmers, and then I kind of dug my way through that by looking at these different addresses and wallet profiler and so on, and then that led me to the actual liquidation transaction via some custom stuff that I did on the side there. So that's kind of that's one thing that I looked at. Let me just jump back to the crowdcast to see if people are asking questions.
Very cool. Yeah, we had a question from our friend State Layer if that comp liquidations dashboard was an internal one, and the answer is yes. But this is kind of an example of how the dashboards that we have are really the tip of the iceberg, and we're constantly looking to make new dashboards based on things like comp liquidations or on any protocol. Really, there's always interesting things to look at. So if ever there's a kind of feature or thing that anyone wants to look at, we're always open to feature suggestions, and we can put that on our roadmap. This comp liquidations dashboard will probably at some point release that publicly, or find a way of maybe doing a broader liquidations dashboard that covers a number of different protocols.
Yeah, that's exactly my thinking as well. And so it kind of shows like how many of the dashboards in our platform are sort of organically created through the needs of trying to understand what's happening on the blockchain. So as you said, Daniel, I think that what we'll probably do is to make a broader liquidations dashboard, which would cover several other platforms like Compound, Aave, perhaps MakerDAO as well, and so on. And it'll be broader than just looking at DAI liquidations on Compound.
Yep, perfect. So another big topic that was in the zeitgeist this week was ETH2. Were you a validator? Did you get in on the first batch?
I may or may not be a validator. Yes.
Okay. Mysterious, but I've heard rumors that maybe it's a yes. So maybe you can walk us through what we were looking at Nansen for ETH2, and kind of the dashboard that we made, and what was interesting about ETH2.
Yeah, so anyone who's a Nansen user can look at the very bottom of this dashboards list. It's getting so long now that it's like not even fitting in one screen. So we'll probably have to clean that up a bit and structure it differently. But at the bottom, you see Ethereum 2.0 phase 0. And so this dashboard shows, initially it was trying to track how much Ether was going into the deposit contract so that we can understand if we're going to hit this goal that was set for the 24th of November. We've since then changed the layout a bit because obviously we've hit that goal. So that's kind of less interesting. But now one thing that people are interested in is, for example, who are the depositors into that contract, because they will ultimately be the validators on the new network. So you can see, for example, how many unique addresses have deposited ETH into the deposit contract. And it's above 2,000 now, which is cool. And that translates to more than 23,000 unique validators on Ethereum 2.0. So effectively one slot of 32 Ether equals one validator. So you can also see the sort of aggregate or cumulative amount of ETH in that contract. And it's now at 750,000 Ether, which is cool. And you've got that line, which was kind of basically the tipping point, right, where it would launch. And so it smashed through that, which was great. But of course, since then, it's slowed off a bit, which is quite normal. So that's the deposit contract at a macro level. But the cool thing about Nansen is that we don't only have like the on-chain data, which gives you interesting analytics, but it's quite limited what you can do with it. So we also have this contextual layer on top of our blockchain data. So one question that you might ask is, first of all, maybe starting down here, who is actually depositing into that contract? And we have this entity view where we can associate addresses with entities. And so many of these entities are actually staking pools. And we're working now on like expanding the addresses that we have for these staking pools. But for example, you see staked, which is basically staked.us. That's one big pool that accounts for about 12%, 12.5% of all the ether that's been deposited. So that's a pretty big chunk on its own. Bitcoin Swiss is another one that was very early on to start depositing on behalf of their clients into the contract. And they did some, press releases that actually helped us identify their addresses, which was useful. And then Stakefish is another staking pool. Cream is another one. And then you've got even some of these like individuals that we know because their addresses have been communicated publicly that belong to them. We don't normally track individuals in Nansen, but there are some cases where, for example, Kine from Synthetics will have published his address as a protocol politician or something like that for Compound, and in those cases we'll tag them and you'll see them in the platform. But mostly we care about projects, right, and corporations and project entities, broadly speaking. So that's what we've got labels on. So you can see who's deposited like directly into the contract. You can also take one step back and say, well, if you look at the depositors, where did the depositors get their ETH from? And that's what this this chart up here shows. And so most of them got their ether from unknown entities, which is what you would expect. But you see Bitcoin Swiss, this is kind of maybe a trivial one because Bitcoin Swiss got their ether from another Bitcoin Swiss address. But you also see Uniswap as a big entity here. So many of these people got their ETH from Uniswap, probably through trading, or maybe they were liquidity providers and they pulled out their ETH in order to deposit it into the ETH2 contract. You have F2 pool, which is like a mining pool. And I think it's also associated with Stakefish. Mm-hmm. So I noticed that there's an association between those two, like when I dug into this a bit more. Ethereum Foundation is another one where actually I got a comment from Vitalik on one of my tweets because I had Ethereum Foundation as a depositor and he objected to that. But if you look at the actual traces, you can find addresses that received ether directly from the Ethereum Foundation, but they were probably grant recipients and not Ethereum Foundation itself. But that's one example, where you see that.
A related note on that one. Someone on Twitter was asking how many ETH ICO participants had contributed, and I guess you can't see it on this one, but we dug into the data and found that there were at least 11 distinct ETH ICO depositors. I think the biggest one put in probably around 1,000, and that's not obviously including Vitalik, who put in quite a bit more.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. So you can scroll down and see the top depositors, which are the literal like direct addresses sorted by how much ether they've deposited. And I guess one way you would answer that question is like literally just clicking through it and looking for ETH ICO participant labels, like this guy here or this girl. 1,024 ETH they've deposited, and this is a vanilla. This specific address received ether from the original Ethereum ICO, so they've been through the whole journey of Ethereum 1.0. Yeah, and we could maybe do like a custom query for the question that you had answered, but you could also sort of just like click through it and get an idea of roughly how many had deposited.
The other way of you can click through, but the other option for kind of doing analyses or answering questions when you have lists like this is we do have a CSV download feature that's available available as kind of an add-on to the standard tier. So you could, and if anyone's interested in that, they can just reach out to us on Discord. But basically, you just download this list into an Excel or wherever you want, into Pandas, and then just filter down by the tags and find the ETH ICO deposit or ETH ICO participants.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say one more thing about this? So, before we made this dashboard, I was actually following along a bit on the contract, even with just using one of our existing dashboards, because you could also just look at Wallet Profiler, because this is probably the second most popular dashboard we have, and you could have just plugged in the contract address from the ETH2 deposit contract, and you actually get a lot of stats from that. So some of this is going to be empty, because like these top ones, because the contract itself doesn't send Ether anywhere, so you won't see any like activity charts. But if you look at like the incoming ETH, you would have seen that right away, and like you wouldn't have to wait for us to create the ETH2 dashboard. You could have just like right away taken the contract and plug it into Wallet Profiler, and you actually get already a lot of interesting analytics. And so, I won't go too much into details on like what these tables are. Maybe we can do that separately or in a YouTube video. But you can see a lot of these coming up already. Actually, I think I can try to answer your question right away on the fly, because if you look at this and you look at like number of addresses, this is aggregated to labels. So if we sorted by the number of addresses, you can actually see here the number of ETH ICO participants, and it's 12.
Super cool.
Yeah, so like it's an example of how like Nansen is like pretty flexible in that sense, where we have these kind of, I think of them as like analytical Lego blocks, right? The Wallet Profiler can be used for a lot of different purposes. So if you see a new address, in many cases, it's a good idea to just spin it through the Wallet Profiler, and you might learn something just from doing that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I actually didn't even think of that. I would say that as we develop Nansen, there's kind of a balance between us curating these different views for users, but also finding a balance with self-serve analytics. There's a question in the chat here from State Layer again, who asked how can we build, or how can users build their own dashboards? Right now, if one is really interested, they can definitely reach out to us privately, and we can figure that out with them. But for the most part, there's so much low-hanging fruit in terms of the dashboards that we think are valuable for our entire user base that we're constantly pushing out new dashboards. But yeah, State, we'll chat on Discord about that if you're interested in some custom dashboards.
Maybe I can just add briefly that we are also working on expanding our kind of VIP tier, and so in some cases the thinking is that people will be allowed to create their own custom private dashboards, in the platform. But we haven't rolled that out fully yet, because we want to make sure that it's actually easy to use and not too confusing with all the different tables and views and aggregations we have. So, and like we want to have good documentation and so on. So that's we could theoretically, roll it out today, but it wouldn't be a great user experience if you, know how to write SQL and so on, if you don't have the proper documentation and like, table names that are coherent and so on and so forth. So I think, yeah, as Daniel said, like definitely reach out if you're interested in that, and we can probably put you on like a short list so you get notified when you can get access to that.
Yeah. So in terms of new dashboards that we put out recently, maybe we can go over the Aave dashboard real quick, and then we can show people kind of behind the curtains on some of the other new dashboards we've got in the works, like the Smart Money dashboard.
Yes. So the Aave dashboard is pretty cool because we built it together with Aave. So they kind of told us what were some of the aspects of the Aave platform that they wanted to show in this dashboard. So you can again find it by just clicking dashboards, and then you see it here, Aave. or you can just go pro.nansen.ai/Aave, and you'll be taken to it. And if there are any non-customers of Nansen, like you don't have an account yet, this is actually one of the few dashboards that is available for free. So you don't actually even need to have an account to see this dashboard. There's a lot of other stuff about Aave that you can find useful information about in other dashboards, but this one in particular is open to everyone. So I've got a separate YouTube video on this as well. So I'm not going to go too much into details, but just to give you an overview, it basically has 4 sections. The first section is token distribution. And so that looks at, where are all these different Aave related tokens sitting? And also how many holders are there of those? Because if you look at Aave, the token Aave, that's one thing, but then you have Aave, and you have lend, and you have lend, and you have staked Aave, right? So already there you have 5 different tokens, which makes it difficult to see in, for example, token god mode alone. So this sort of aggregates those different things and puts them on one chart. For example, the holders of all these Aave variants, and you can see the growth of that over time. It's basically up to the right, which is a good thing. And you can see also how much tokens are held, or how many wallets hold what amount of tokens, and where we've scaled it so that 100 lend equals 1 Aave, so that they're comparable, because that's the conversion rate if you do the migration. But you can also look at the location of the tokens, like where are the tokens sitting, and again, we've made that kind of conveniently placed out across the different tokens that exist. So you can see top entities, you can see top individual holders, and you can see, what percentage in total those top addresses account for. There's the safety module, which talks mostly about the staking. So you can see, for example, how many Aave tokens are being staked, and also you can see the APY that you get in return for staking your Aave tokens. And you see the top stakers as well, which is kind of cool. So you see this address, DeFiMaximalist.eth, is one of the addresses you might want to follow, because they do a lot of great investments, actually. You can see their staked Aave, and you can see approximately how much rewards they have, because this is based on how much they've claimed, and it doesn't include the unclaimed ones. And yeah, you can see that there actually as well. You can see the number of days they've staked, and you see what percentage of their Aave tokens is being staked. So this particular one is staking all of their tokens, but the top one is only staking about 22% of their tokens.
So sorry, real quick, if you don't mind me hopping in. So why is a dashboard like this useful to people? Like how can they, beyond just getting educated on Aave, how can they use this practically?
So I think many people use Nansen to understand what the smart money is doing. And when you see addresses like DeFiMaximalist.eth or DeFiWhale.eth, and you see them staking, that gives you some degree of comfort that, first of all, these smart money wallets actually trust this contract, which definitely isn't a perfect heuristic. It's not always going to be, the thing that tells you that this is safe, or that this is without risk. But it does give you a data point on the risk-reward ratio here. Probably you can assume, I would say in most cases, that they've done some form of due diligence on this. And so that's one reason why it's useful to see basically what some of the smart money is doing. So if you're on the fence and thinking, should I be staking my Aave or should I be doing something else with it? It might help you to see that some of these smart money wallets actually are staking. So maybe it's not such a bad idea. Maybe they've done some due diligence. So you can sort of copy stake them, if you will. That's probably the main use in this particular one. I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. So, I mean, when you're looking at these kind of things, so this DeFiMaximalist.eth is staking 200,000 Aave, which is over $10 million. So they are clearly taking a directional bet on Aave, since they're holding spot, like they're holding Aave token and staking it. So if you're taking a directional bet on Aave, maybe they've got it hedged somewhere, but if you're taking a directional bet on Aave, you can increase the kind of yield on that position by staking it in Aave and getting an extra, 5%? What's the APY at? If you scroll up? Yeah, 5%. So they're making like 50K. So their rewards are approximately 1,000 Aave. So they're making an extra 50K on USD worth of additional rewards on their Aave position that they already were going to hold, since they are holding spot. And they've been in this, they've been staking since nearly the beginning. They've been staking for 47 days. So, as Alex said, like this is smart money who trusts the contract well enough and is just squeezing more juice out of their position.
Yeah. We should probably add the mandatory disclaimer that like none of what we say is like financial advice, and obviously there is risk involved. So there's going to be examples where smart money makes decisions which ultimately turns out not to be a smart decision, and they lose money. And so if you just blindly jump into whatever the smart money is doing, that's risky as well. But this is one way to think about how you can apply some of these heuristics when you're making decisions on the blockchain.
Yeah, and maybe you can scroll down a little bit, and we can just briefly show so there's governance, obviously, and then there's the utilization of these different pools, of these different kind of lending pools. How in the future, just looping back to what we were talking about earlier with liquidations, like how would someone what would be kind of your vision, if we're just brainstorming out loud here, on how you would use a dashboard like this in conjunction with like the liquidations dashboard?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think first of all, it's good to it gives some degree of comfort having a good overview of what the situation of the money market just looks like. If you go to Aave, it has very useful, interest rates and so on, which I'd say is probably what you care about the most. But if you see this kind of view, it just tells you, very visually, like this is the amount of money that's kind of sitting in the link money market, right? In total, that's kind of the balance of that particular pool or that particular currency market. And then you see just visually how much of that liquidity is borrowed and how much is available to be borrowed. And so you can see some things right away. Like, for example, the stable coins have, the borrowing percent is very high for those. And that's probably because the price doesn't swing that much. So you can afford to take risk getting close to the ratio of what you can borrow. But also it's probably because people are comfortable, paying higher interest rates in stable coins because it's fiat, it's not crypto, right? So you kind of know a bit more about how much it's going to cost you to do a loan on a stable coin, which you're then maybe going to use for leverage to buy like even more crypto or something like that. So just kind of like getting this more, sort of intuitive understanding of these money markets, I think is useful. In terms of liquidations, I think we should probably consider having a separate section for liquidations in particular. So this, I don't see like directly how this is useful for liquidations as such, but it does give you this, this view of the actual, markets. But so, for an individual address, if they effectively go underwater and they get liquidated, like that's not something you can see directly from this chart, for example. Mm-hmm. You can see, activity though. Like, so on the left here, you have deposits, and then on the right, you have deposits and withdrawals. And on the other, you have borrows and repays. So these are like kind of like saving activity, and this is like borrowing activity. And you can see how it actually spiked, probably because, there's ripple effects of the stuff with compound, and also now with the prices dumping and so on. You can see right away that there is something going on in this particular money market. So maybe the last thing I'll just show at the bottom is the liquidity and utilization ratios. And so utilization is simply the proportion. So it's kind of the proportion that's being borrowed out of the total liquidity. And so if you look at something like USDC, that has a very high utilization rate or ratio. So 88% of all the pooled USDC is currently being lent out, or someone is borrowing it. But if you look at something, you can actually kind of compare it visually, right? So that's USDC up here. And then if you look at something like REN, which has a very low utilization, if I can find that in this dashboard, let's see, here we go. You see here, right, it's very low, 4%. So it's super low. And so you could see, are there interesting movements here? So I noted in this YouTube video I made that with Wi-Fi, I was looking over this, and I noticed that actually there's a peak here, and that peak coincided with the infamous Y squeeze, when there was basically a short seller who was squeezed out of a position on Wi-Fi, and it was actually the bottom in price for Wi-Fi, at least, a local bottom there. So it just gives you kind of like a better understanding of what's happening with these different markets, and it shows you that looking at price alone, it doesn't give you the full picture. You can kind of get to some hypotheses and test some hypotheses on what's happening in these money markets, and maybe that impacts the price or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess another way you could kind of look at these things, it's not as relevant anymore, but I bet if we were to trace back over the summer, you would see a pretty large utilization spike on some of these assets for yield farming. For example, if you wanted Maker or SNX, and if you see a spike in that, you can assume that there's a new yield farm that has absurd APYs for one of these assets.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. I'm sure you would see that. I think we only have 60 days history or something like that on these charts. But yeah, so you can still see it. I mean, all these stable coins have high utilization rates. And I do think that one reason is that they are used for yield farming. And the other reason is that people feel comfortable borrowing them because under normal circumstances, the price won't change very much. Like what happened with Compound is actually an example of what can happen in an extreme situation, because everyone's debt suddenly spiked with 30%. But under normal circumstances, you wouldn't expect that debt actually changes that much, so you don't risk getting liquidated. But if you, for example, let's say you borrowed wrapped BTC from Aave, right? And then you collateralized USDC, like pretty much the other way around. Then if Bitcoin spikes in price, you'd get liquidated. So that's one reason why people are not as comfortable borrowing assets like wrapped Bitcoin, and you can see utilization is pretty low because they don't want to get liquidated, right? If those assets suddenly spike in price.
Mm-hmm. We just got a note in the chat, which is someone was asking for what assets are being used as collateral rather than, or they would like a dashboard that shows which coins are being used as collateral as opposed to which coins are being borrowed. Is that basically just the available liquidity? Would you consider the available liquidity for a coin effectively the amount of collateral, or is that different?
I guess it is related, right? Because I mean, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same thing, but they are definitely related, and they're definitely correlated, if not the same thing. So I haven't thought through it fully, but basically, in order to borrow something, you need to collateralize something else. And so you could sort of think of this as like, yes, there's a lot of wrapped Bitcoin stuck in the platform used as collateral, which can then be used to borrow some of these other things. So perhaps one way, I mean, I haven't thought about it mathematically, but maybe it is actually just effectively the same thing. Because obviously, if you take the sum of this, if you take the sum of all this area, right, in USD terms, that can't be larger than this area, because that represents the collateral that's sitting in the platform, right? So in one sense, it does actually map out, at least it will heavily correlate, if not be the exact same thing as what's being used as collateral.
Yeah, so borrowed is strictly less than available liquidity. That obviously makes sense. Or like the sum of borrowed is strictly the sum of available liquidity.
Yeah, it has to be because it's over collateralized.
Yeah, maybe we would have to dig in on this, but I'm just thinking out loud here. Is it possible to see, like, let's say someone puts in WBTC, can we trace like their specific borrows and then potentially lay out an aggregated view in like a Sankey chart or something like that? Or you know those ones where you start with a certain amount and it flows to different endpoints?
Yeah, I think it could be nice to have just like a matrix, effectively. You know, what's supplied as collateral and what's borrowed, and then you get sort of this heat map, you know, in a matrix with all the assets, right? Like
Yeah,
in either dimension. That'd be pretty cool. Because yeah, you don't know. Like let's say all the people providing link as collateral, they're all borrowing USDT, and all the WBTC are borrowing all USDC, right? You don't see that in this chart. Like you would need to connect those two things.
yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely possible to do it. It'd be a bit more complex, but it is definitely possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep it moving. So there's I guess a couple directions we could go here, and I'll give you the choice. We'll go in both of these directions eventually. We just got a question from Martin asking if we've been following any of the addresses with the flash loan exploits. So the option there would be, let's dive in on the Flash Boys chart. The other option is following up on this discussion of, you know, DeFi maximalist or DeFi whale being smart money. We could give a little sample of the smart money dashboard. So
yeah,
let's
start with Flash Boys. So this, to be clear, this is work in progress, right? But we figure that these sessions could be quite cool to just show some of the stuff that we're working on, which is going to be released soon. And so we have this dashboard that we're working on called Flash Boys, and what it does effectively is that our algorithms pick up, you know, what qualifies as not just flash loans, but we use the term Flash Boys, but it's both flash loans, but also ARBs that are made. You know, in some cases, you don't actually need to do a flash loan. You can still do an ARB if you have like the collateral or the capital that you need to make a transaction. But in any case, we've sort of aggregated this, and actually let me zoom out because this gets kind of uninteresting with such a small. Actually, let's do like the whole year, and then see how that works. So you can sort of set the start and end, and it's going to give you stats on flash loans and ARBs or ARB bots and ARB traders. And so it shows, for example, and like don't quote any of these numbers yet, because it really is, we haven't released it yet, and we need to obviously do QA on it, but hopefully it gives you an idea. You can see the profits in USD that were generated per day. You can also see the gas spent by these addresses, and you can see the revenue. So obviously profit is just the revenue minus the gas spent, and that's effectively, you know, what it shows. And you have some, you know, some basic stats here on like how many different flash contracts are there, how many different callers are there of those, and then just the total amounts of revenue and so on. And we've broken it down to the profit distribution, because it's interesting to understand like how much is being made in each transaction. And sometimes people lose money, right? You can imagine doing some ARB, and then it turns out that the gas cost actually was too high, and you ended up losing money on it. And that, it seems like, at least with this data, about 7.5% of these trades actually ended up losing money, but you know, more than 90% ended up making money. And so about half, like 55%, made up to $1,000 in profits, and then 32% made between $1,000 and $10,000. 4% made between 10,000 and 100,000, and so on and forth. So on and so forth. So that's like the profit distribution. This one I actually haven't seen because it's being worked on, but it looks like, yeah, it's a scatter plot that shows how much gas is being spent and then how much profit, right? And then you can hover over these and you see the caller contracts for these different addresses and transactions. You can also see a ranking of like the top flash traders And this one is kind of funny because they've got an actual ENS name. So that's maybe a smart money wallet to be following, right? Maybe they're doing other interesting things too. WhalerDAO.eth, Warpy.eth. So maybe that's one to make note of. And then individual transactions you can see down here as well. So, and we've got linked to Etherscan, right? So if you wanted to see this one that took place on November 18th, you would click through and you can see this here. And actually, there's this insane swap on MPH. And you can see, yeah, so this looks like a, I don't know if this is actually a flash loan. I think it looks more like an ARB that was made, or some kind of exploit or something. I actually don't know, so I'm not going to comment too much on it. But in any case, this is something that's going to be available soon in the platform, and you'll be able to explore flash loans, flash swaps, and ARBs in a pretty nice way.
That WhalerDAO one was, I think that's actually a DAO that is, I guess you could call them like white hat flash loaners. They cool. They've got a manifesto, and it's something along the lines of the WhalerDAO is the benefactors of DeFi good, or something to those something
cool.
about it.
I don't know. Nice.
Yeah, it'd actually be interesting if at some point we could kind of segment this into like maybe black hat flash traders, white hat and gray hat, depending on where they land. Because I guess you could also see things like Keeper DAO on here at some point.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, if they get active enough and they make enough money, then you'd probably expect them to show up here.
Yeah. And once again, these numbers are still we still got to QA these, so no one quote these stats of of whatever it was, like X% were unprofitable. State is asking, can you drop that top Flashboy address in the chat real quick? I'll DM it to you.
Yeah. So you mean this one, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can drop it in the chat. I mean,
sure. Yeah, I guess that's an incentive for people in the future to join us. Actually, as we've been diving in on this chat, there's been a big influx of new live attendees. So
nice. Happy to hear.
I guess you guys are sharing with your friends, which is good. Okay, well, now that we've seen some smart on-chain quant Flash boys, let's dive in on just the maybe non-quant version and go into the smart money dashboard, which shows more funds and I guess higher latency strategies.
So the same disclaimer applies here. This is not released yet. We're planning on soft launching this pretty soon. But basically, the idea here is that we want to aggregate sort of the 0.1% of addresses that actually represent smart money on the blockchain. You don't really, in many cases, if you're an investor or trader, you probably don't care about what every single address on the blockchain does. What you care about is what the smart money is doing. And so that's the premise of this dashboard. And what we've done is we have lots of different methods to basically classify addresses as smart money or not. And we can then take that as one segment and then create macro stats across that segment. So for example, which tokens are they holding? And so that's what this first one is showing. And so you could sort this, on total balance, and you see that actually compound ether is like it's the top balance in USD terms. Again, like, want to be crystal clear, like this is still work in progress, so we're going to add more addresses to the smart money segment and so on. But at least that's what it's showing me right now. Sushi Bar is another one that's there. Maker is actually here as well. And then you can see number of addresses. Hex, that's interesting. Probably because they airdropped like a lot of tokens to big whales and so on. You can sort by the change. So the change in one day looks like a lot of USDC came in, maybe because people were selling other crypto assets. And for example, or maybe they were just cashing out from Compound because of what happened, which also makes sense. Change 7 days, like it's the same thing, just across 7 days, and 30 days as well. So that's like the token holdings. And then you can look at, for example, what are the top volume DEX markets? And so again, sorting by volume, maybe we can sort by like 30 days, or actually I think 7 days was kind of more interesting. So Wrapped Ether and Pickle is the top market currently with this segment in the last 7 days. So a lot of smart money trading in that market. DAI TUSD as well, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure why. USDC and DAI USDC. So these are like stablecoin trades. They're kind of like less interesting. Maybe there was some good ARBs available. I'm not sure. And then Wrapped Ether and MPH, which actually replaced. They deployed a new contract for their token, so that's why it says new there. And then you can also break it down to like the individual DEX trades and which DEX they took place on. So, for example, here's one that we have labeled a Smart LP, a Smart Liquidity Provider. They made a trade on Curve, and you can also just click through and get that transaction right away, and you see that was indeed a swap of DAI for USDC. And yeah, you actually see some of these ETH there as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Would you mind kind of walking through what Smart LP means and what other tags we have here in the smart money category?
Yeah. So Smart LP means Smart Liquidity Provider. So it effectively means that someone who made a lot of money providing liquidity. And when I say a lot of money, I don't actually remember the exact threshold, but it's basically in the order of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, providing liquidity on, for example, Uniswap or SushiSwap. So that's kind of the Smart LP. This one here, and this is something that happens because people have ENS names, right? The little star means that they previously had this ENS name, but they've now sent it somewhere else. So I actually don't know why this one is identified as smart money, but it could be for like quantitative reasons. So they've made a lot of money in the past. It could be that they are also a smart LP, but since we have the ENS name, we choose to show the ENS name because we feel that's more informative than just seeing like a smart LP label. So soon you'll be able to like drill down, and you could click through and get a wallet profile review of this address, and you'd see the exact labels, and that would reveal why this is smart money. So it might say smart LP, or it might say some other reason for why it's a smart money wallet. But currently you're limited to this view. But you can click through this. You see there's like this Wi-Fi whale, a lot of smart LPs. We have some Flash Boys here as well. So if you're a Flash loan trader, for example, you'll typically get labeled as Flash Boy. And then you see Alameda, for example, which is a known fund, right? They made a 2.87 million USDT trade to 2.85 DAI trade. So again, just clicking through on this, you can see here very clearly it's a swap from Tether to DAI that they made 10 hours ago, which is kind of interesting because, like, I don't know exactly. Do you remember when the
Coinbase one? Maybe they netted that ARB. That would be pretty interesting. Can we maybe not? Maybe after we can dive in, but see if they deposited into Coinbase at all.
Exactly. So I don't know exactly when the price spiked, right? So maybe it says in the article. At least I asked them to post it there. But you could imagine that they see, hey, DAI is trading at like a 30-cent premium. Like, let's just ARB that. Like, let's just take some USDT, get some DAI, and send that DAI into Coinbase, right? We probably don't have time to like investigate if that's what happened, but that's definitely something you could figure out using Nansen.
Yeah, and just going back to this. So sorry to Anthony for the docs on this stream, but maybe you can dive.
But
yeah. I guess I want to highlight that our goal is not to dox individuals at all. I think you mentioned this earlier. We're far more interested in heuristically tracking these different categories of smart money. maybe you can kind of go over some good hygiene practices for wallets and how people can kind of maintain their anonymity so that we can track them heuristically rather than through their ENS addresses.
Yeah, so typically the way people dox themselves really is through ENS names. So I think one common mistake is people think that if you just send the ENS token somewhere else, then they won't be labeled any longer as that name. But of course, blockchain is a ledger, right? So the fact that you used to own that ENS name is forever etched into history. So that doesn't go away. So I would advise anyone who has an ENS name and can get a new wallet, you should probably just get a new wallet. You should probably then, the most pragmatic solution is to send your funds to a centralized exchange that allows you to spin up new deposit addresses. So typically Binance does not allow for that, for example, but Coinbase does. I think also Bitfinex does. So you would basically, let's say you have, I don't know, $1,000 in your wallet and you have it in USDC, you could just send that to Coinbase with a new deposit address and then basically withdraw it on the other end. If it's a very particular amount, you also don't want to withdraw the exact same amount because then the amount can be used to dox you. So you want to withdraw that those tokens from USDC to a brand new wallet because then it's really hard to link it together. So that's what I would do. Like if you're an individual and you have an ENS name that is revealing about your identity and you kind of didn't quite get that when you got it, or like that wasn't the intention, getting a fresh wallet is definitely the way to go, and probably migrate your assets through a centralized exchange like Coinbase is the pragmatic way to go. You can also use like Tornado Cash and so on if you want to do that, but that I would say it's still, it's a different thing. I don't want to comment on it too much, but I'd be cautious of assuming that that's going to 100%, hide the traces. So my pragmatic advice would be to go through a centralized exchange. It is a bit anti-crypto ethos to do that because obviously Coinbase is not a smart contract, it's not decentralized and all that stuff. But from a pragmatic perspective, that's what I would do.
Yeah, and that being said, if you do want us to track it, feel free to buy an ENS address, and you can think of Nansen as almost a public leaderboard for your different trades, especially if you get in on these smart segments or flash boy segments. Yeah,
just one quick comment on that because newbie.eth, right? It's like one example of that. Like we don't know who newbie.eth is, but he shows up or she shows up in our dashboards. And you can have this kind of on-chain personality, right? It's like an anon account by having ENS names. So ENS names are not bad inherently, but you might not want to link your ENS name to your personal name or personal identity. So, you could create this famous on-chain personality that no one knows who is, and it's persistent and it's clearly visible in Nansen through an ENS name. So I totally agree with that. That's a good point.
Yeah, other examples are like Degen Spartan or this kind of DeFi activist or DeFi whale or all these guys.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions in the chat? We'll start wrapping it up here, but happy to answer any specific questions. It's private labels. Yeah, that's a good question. So Alex, maybe you can touch on kind of personalization features within Nansen and custom address books.
Yeah, private labels means being able to add your own labels and then seeing them in the interface. So that's on the roadmap. We're planning on shipping it this quarter, so before New Year's, and I hope we will be able to do that.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think it's been a pretty great first office hours. We really appreciate everyone who joined. If you have any feedback or anything like that, anything we can cover for the next one of these, definitely let us know in the Discord or feel free to DM Alex or I. We're pretty active on Twitter, so feel free to add us at any at any time. And anything to close on, Alex?
No, thanks very much for joining. It was fun, and we're going to keep iterating on this format. It's going to be a lot of cool content coming out through this channel.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.